I took a mail route in Arizona. There are strange rules to follow. The route begins. The desert is a lonely place. People think of Arizona as endless highways and empty stretches of sand. But out here, in the places no one talks about, the land isn't just empty. It's watching. It's waiting. When I took a mail route in the small town of Red Hollow, I thought it would be simple. Drive, drop off letters, go home. But then I was given a rule book, a strange, unsettling list of instructions that made no sense. Never deliver mail to Box 23. If you hear whistling in the desert, do not look for the source. The old woman at 109 Jasper Street will invite you inside. Do not accept. At first, I thought it was a joke. A stupid superstition meant to scare the new guy. I don't think that anymore. Because now, something is following me, and I don't know if I'll make it back. The desert highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the lifeless Arizona wasteland. The sun, an unforgiving orb, baked the earth until it fractured, and the wind carried the whispers of things unseen. I had taken a job out of desperation. Delivering mail in a rural town seemed easy enough. Drive, drop off letters, repeat. But the postmaster's words clung to me, even as I tried to shake them off. Follow the rules, son. They ain't just guidelines. They're what keep you alive. At the time, I had laughed it off. Rules? For delivering mail? What was the worst that could happen? Angry dogs, nosy neighbors, the occasional misplaced package. I had no idea what I was walking into. I arrived at the tiny post office in Red Hollow, Arizona, just after dawn. The building was old, sun-bleached, and crumbling at the edges. Inside, the air smelled of dust and faded ink, and an ancient fan spun lazily overhead. The postmaster, a wiry man named Earl, slid a small, leather-bound book across the counter toward me. Your rule book, he said. Memorize it. I flipped through the pages, expecting basic instructions. Instead, I found something else entirely. Rule number 1, never deliver mail to Box 23. Rule number 2, if you hear whistling in the desert, do not look for the source. Rule number 3, if a letter arrives with no return address, do not read it. Do not touch it. Take it to the drop box behind the post office. Rule number 4, the old woman at 109 Jasper Street will invite you inside. Do not accept. Rule number 5, if you see something following you in the mirror, ignore it. It is testing you. What the hell is this? I asked, laughing nervously. Earl didn't smile. Your life, if you want to keep it. I hesitated. Maybe it was some weird local joke, a way to haze the new guy. But something in Earl's sunken eyes made my stomach twist. You don't believe me, he said, as if reading my mind. You will. I took the mailbag, stepped outside, and climbed into the old postal truck. The engine rumbled to life, and I pulled onto the road, my first delivery route mapped out before me. The morning air was crisp, the town still asleep, and for a while, everything felt normal. Then, I reached Jasper Street. The invitation. The houses were old, leaning against the wind like weary travelers. I scanned the addresses, stopping at 109. The house sat at the very end of the street, a sagging Victorian relic wrapped in dead ivy. A single window on the second floor was open, curtains billowing outward like pale fingers reaching for something unseen. I hesitated, remembering the rule. The old woman at 109 Jasper Street will invite you inside. Do not accept. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out, clutching the small bundle of letters. The porch creaked under my weight, and I slid the envelope into the rusted mailbox. I turned to leave. Then I heard it. A voice, thin, wavering, and just behind me. Won't you come in, dear? I froze. Slowly I turned. The old woman stood in the doorway, her nightgown draped around her like funeral linens. Her skin was paper thin, stretched too tightly over her bones. Her eyes, dark, endless, locked onto mine. "I have tea," she said softly. "It's dreadfully lonely here." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I have to finish my route," I stammered. She smiled. "It won't take long." Something about the way she said it, like a spider promising safety to a fly, made me take a step back. I should go. Her smile didn't falter. She simply tilted her head and whispered, "Maybe next time." I practically ran back to the truck, my hands shaking as I started the engine. The house blurred in the side mirror as I sped down the street, but I swear I saw her standing there, still smiling, still watching. The next house on my list was on the outskirts of town, miles down a dirt road that cut through the desert. I forced my hands to stop trembling as I drove. I wasn't laughing anymore. The whistling in the desert. The town faded behind me as the road turned to dust and gravel. Cacti lined the barren landscape, casting skeletal shadows. The sky stretched wide and empty, and an eerie silence settled over the world. Then I heard it, a soft, melodic whistling. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper on the wind, but it grew louder, closer. The tune was slow, deliberate, almost searching. I swallowed hard. If you hear whistling in the desert, do not look for the source. My fingers gripped the wool tighter. It was just the wind, I told myself. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, the whistling stopped, and something tapped against the passenger window. I nearly swerved off the road. My breath caught in my throat as I forced myself to stare straight ahead. I wouldn't look. I couldn't. The tap came again. A slow, deliberate knock. Tap, tap, tap. The truck's headlights flickered. The air grew heavy, pressing against me like unseen hands. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure stood in the desert, just at the edge of the light. Tall, wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body shifting as if struggling to hold its shape. And its face, oh God, its face was just a void, an absence where a mouth, a nose, a pair of eyes should be. It raised a hand. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, tires spitting gravel. I didn't look back. Not until I reached the next house, the engine humming beneath me, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my chest. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed the next envelope. No return address. My stomach sank. If a letter arrives with no return address, do not read it. Do not touch it. Take it to the drop box behind the post office. I glanced at the envelope in my hands. The paper was wet, not with water. Something darker, thicker, something that smelled like rust and decay. I had never wanted to quit a job so badly in my life. The letter with no name. The first day on my mail route nearly ended with me quitting on the spot. The old woman at 109 Jasper Street had invited me inside, and I barely escaped her eerie, knowing smile. Then, something knocked on my truck window in the middle of the desert. I didn't look, but I saw it anyway. A tall, shifting figure with a face like an empty void. Now I sat in my truck, gripping an envelope with no return address. One of the forbidden deliveries. It was damp with something dark and metallic smelling. I knew the rule. Do not open it. Do not touch it. Take it to the drop box behind the post office. I should have followed that rule. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing hard, the nameless letter lying on the passenger seat like a live thing. The paper was wet, the ink smudged. My gut twisted, warning me to throw in the back and drive straight to the post office. But my hands, almost without thinking, moved toward it. Just one peek, just to see what could possibly be so dangerous about a letter. I unsealed the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a single, folded page. There were only 5 words written inside. You shouldn't have looked. My blood turned to ice. A sound, low and wet, came from the back of the truck. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head. The mail bags were piled neatly, nothing out of place. But the shadows in the back shifted, something pulling itself up from the darkness. A shape, thin, contorted, too many joints in the wrong places, unfurled. It crawled forward, its long fingers tapping against the floor. I slammed the envelope shut, shoving it back into the seat. The sound stopped. Silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, something scratched against the inside of the truck. Not from the back, but the ceiling, as if something was clinging to the roof, waiting for me to make the wrong move. My heart pounded. The rule was clear. Take the letter to the drop box. I needed to get out of here. Without another glance, I threw the truck into gear and sped away from the house, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a lingering sense that something was still watching me. The drop box. By the time I reached the post office, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. The streets were empty, too empty, as if the town itself was holding its breath. I pulled around to the back of the building, where a rusted metal drop box sat beneath a flickering light. The moment I stepped out, the air shifted, heavy, expectant. I grabbed the cursed letter, holding it at arm's length as I approached the box. The metal was cold, despite the desert heat. Just as I slipped the letter inside, a whisper brushed against my ear. "It knows you now." I spun around, but no one was there. The alley was empty. The night was too still. A metallic click came from the drop box, like something unlocking from the inside. Then nothing. I turned back to my truck, forcing myself not to run. Whatever I had just done, whatever I had just set in motion, it wasn't over. And something told me the rules weren't just to keep me safe anymore. They were the only thing keeping it out. Box 23. The next morning, I walked into the post office to find Earl staring at me. His sunken eyes measured me, taking in the dark circles under my eyes, the way my fingers twitched. "You opened it, didn't you?" he asked. I swallowed hard. He slammed his fist on the counter, making me flinch. Don't ever break the rules again. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but before I could, he shoved a new bundle of mail into my hands. "Last stop today is Route 6. Just get it done and come back before dark." There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. I nodded and took the stack, leaving before he could say anything else. Back in the truck, I sorted through the mail. Bills, packages, a couple of postcards. Then at the very bottom of the pile, I saw it. A letter addressed to Box 23. I froze. Never deliver mail to Box 23. My stomach clenched. The envelope was different from the others. Yellowed with age. The paper too brittle, like it had been waiting for someone to pick it up for a long, long time. A strange scent clung to it, like earth after rain, but sour wrong. I should have taken it straight back inside. I should have refused. Instead, I made the worst mistake of my life. I took Route 6, the wrong delivery. Route 6 wasn't like the others. It didn't wind through town or lead to scattered desert homes. Instead, it took me far beyond the outskirts, down a cracked, abandoned road that wasn't on any map. The further I drove, the more the air felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like it was pressing in on me. Then, the fog started rolling in. It was impossible. This was the desert. There shouldn't be fog. But it poured in from nowhere, swallowing the road behind me, sealing me in. I checked the address again. Box 23. There was no house, no mailbox, just an old, rusted metal post sticking out of the dirt, long forgotten. I hesitated. Then, the truck engine cut off. The radio crackled, a voice whispering through the static. "Leave it and run." My hands trembled as I reached for the letter. I slid it onto the rusted post, my breath coming in short gasps. Something moved in the fog. I didn't stay to see what it was. I ran. Behind me, something dragged itself from the ground. A low, wet sound like a body pulling free from the earth. The truck doors were already locked. I hadn't locked them, but I didn't stop to think. I just yanked the handle, threw myself inside, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. The thing in the fog screamed, a sound that wasn't human. I floored it. The road stretched forever, the fog chasing me, something racing alongside the truck, its limbs scraping the asphalt. But the moment I crossed back into town, the fog vanished, and whatever was chasing me was gone. I parked outside the post office, shaking. The last thing I saw before I turned off the truck was the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw something sitting in the back seat, smiling. The dead letter. I broke the rules. I delivered mail to Box 23, a place that shouldn't exist on any route, to something that shouldn't be waiting in the fog. And now, I think I brought something back with me. Last night, I saw a figure in my rearview mirror, just for a split second, but it was enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone anymore. Enough to know the rules weren't just to protect me. Because something is watching me now, and it's getting closer. The thing in the mirror. I didn't sleep. I sat in my truck outside the post office until the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, my hands gripping the steering, like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I kept checking the rearview mirror. I was afraid to look, but I was more afraid of not looking. I didn't see anything, at least, not at first. Then, as the sun rose higher, something shifted in the reflection. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a smudge on the glass. But as I stared, the smudge moved. A handprint. On the inside of the mirror, the fingers dragged downward, leaving streaks that shouldn't have been there. I turned around, heart hammering. The truck was empty, but the handprint remained in the glass. I barely kept myself from screaming. Something had come back with me. Earl's warning. I stumbled inside the post office, my hands still shaking. Earl looked up from his desk, eyes narrowing the moment he saw me. "You look like hell." I didn't respond, just slammed my hands down on the counter. "I delivered a Box 23, I admitted. Something followed me back. For a moment, Earl didn't move. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. "You've done something real stupid, son." I swallowed hard. "Tell me what's going on. Tell me what the hell Box 23 is." Earl let out a long, tired sigh. "Box 23 ain't a place. It's a door. And you went and knocked on it." I shook my head. "A door to what?" Earl's expression darkened. "To whatever's been waiting on the other side." A chill ran through me. "And now what?" Earl stood, grabbed a rusted key from a drawer, and slammed it into my palm. "You need to go to the dead letter room." The dead letter room. The dead letter room was in the basement of the post office, down a set of concrete steps that smelled like damp earth and something rotting. The key trembled in my grip as I unlocked the door. It groaned open, revealing a cold, windowless room lined with shelves of forgotten letters and packages. Some were so old the paper had turned to dust. Others looked like they had never aged at all. Earl followed me inside, flicking on a dim, buzzing light. "You got something from the other side, don't you?" I hesitated, then pulled out my phone. I had taken a photo of the mirror, the handprint still there. I showed it to him. Earl's face went pale. "God help you," he whispered. I barely had time to react before the room went pitch black. The light had died. Then, from the darkness, whispering. I wasn't alone in the dead letter room. The shadow in the dark. The whispers slithered through the air, overlapping, voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Then, something moved between the shelves. A shape, tall, twisted, its limbs all wrong, crawled toward me. The air turned ice cold as a long, skeletal hand reached toward my face. I staggered back, heart hammering. Earl! But Earl was already running, grabbing something from a nearby shelf. A burned, blackened envelope. He ripped it open, and the whispers stopped. The thing in the dark let out a horrible, guttural sound, a mix of a scream and a growl. Then, the shadows pulled away, and the lights flickered back on. I was alone. Only Earl stood beside me, his face grim. "You're in deep now," he muttered. "And if you don't fix it, you ain't getting out alive." I swallowed. "Fix what?" Earl shoved the blackened envelope into my hands. "You opened something when you took that letter to box 23, he said. "Now you have to send it back. The last delivery." That night, I sat in my truck, staring at the burned envelope in my hands. There was no address, no stamp, just my name scrawled in faded ink. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. With shaking fingers, I tore the envelope open. Inside was another letter, one I recognized, the same letter I had opened 2 nights ago, the one from box 23. But now, the words had changed. There were only 2 this time. "Come home." A sudden, heavy knock echoed from outside the truck. I turned slowly. A figure stood just outside my window. Tall. Wrong. Its face was still just a void, but now I saw something shifting beneath the darkness. A mouth. Smiling. The door unlocked on its own. And then, the door swung open. The thing that called me home. The rules were simple. Never deliver to box 23. Never question the strange rules that came with my mail route in Red Hollow. But I didn't listen. I took a letter to that forgotten place, and now something is following me back. A figure stands outside my truck door. A void where its face should be. A mouth shifting beneath the darkness. It wants me to come home. The problem is, I don't know where home is anymore. The open door. The truck door swung open on its own, the hinges groaning as a wave of cold air swept inside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing outside my door towered over me, its form shifting like a shadow cast by something unseen. It didn't step forward, but I felt it lean in, its presence sinking into my skin like ice. Then it spoke. "We remember you." The words weren't heard. They were felt, vibrating deep in my bones. I wanted to slam the door, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't listen. My hands trembled, white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The entity reached out, long, skeletal fingers stretching toward my chest. And then, a gunshot. The creature shrieked, its form rippling like smoke caught in the wind. It reeled back, vanishing into the darkness. I gasped, my body suddenly free, and turned to see Earl standing in the street, shotgun smoking in his hands. "Get the hell out of the truck," he barked. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out, slamming the door behind me. My heart hammered as I stared at the empty street. The thing was gone. For now. Earl grabbed my arm, his grip iron hard. "We need to finish this. Now." The return of box 23. We drove in silence. The desert stretched endlessly before us, the dark sky pressing down like a suffocating weight. The headlights cut through the night, but the further we drove, the more I realized. The road was different. It stretched longer than before, the familiar landmarks gone. It was as if we were driving somewhere that wasn't part of this world anymore. Earl didn't seem surprised. He just kept driving. I clutched the burned letter in my hands, the one that said, "Come home." I finally broke the silence. What is this thing? What does it want from me? Earl's jaw tightened. "It don't want you, kid. It wants you to remember." "Remember what?" Earl hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You've been here before. My breath caught in my throat. That's not possible. But deep down, something in me knew he was right. A sick feeling curled in my stomach as a memory, half-formed, distorted, buried deep, began to claw its way to the surface. Something terrible had happened at Box 23, and I had been part of it. The forgotten name. When we finally reached Box 23, the fog was already waiting. It crawled across the ground, shifting unnaturally, curling around my ankles like living fingers. The rusted post where I had left the first letter stood exactly where I remembered it, untouched by time. Earl cut the engine and turned to me. His expression was unreadable. "You need to finish what you started." I swallowed hard. My fingers trembled as I stepped out of the truck, the burned letter clutched in my hand. The second my feet touched the ground, the whispers began. Not around me, inside me. Memories flooded back, crashing over me like a tidal wave. The first time I had delivered here, I was a child. Not a mailman, not even a teenager. A child. The postmaster back then, my father, had brought me along one night. I remembered clutching his hand, the way his grip had tightened when we approached Box 23. I had been the one to open the letter, and something had answered me. I had heard the voice in the dark call my name. My real name. I staggered back, gasping. What is this place? Earl's face was grim. "This ain't a place, kid. It's a memory. A door you opened years ago. And now, it's time to shut it for good." The final delivery. I forced myself to step forward. The fog swirled as I reached out, placing the burned letter onto the rusted post. The whispers rose into a shriek. A shape materialized in the fog. The entity from before, its faceless void twisting, warping. But now I could see it more clearly. It had my father's voice. "You should have never come back." A cold, paralyzing terror filled my chest. "Who are you?" It leaned closer. "You already know." The truth struck me like a thunderclap. It wasn't a stranger. It was me, or rather, the version of me that had been left behind all those years ago. The part that had opened the letter, that had been claimed by the thing inside Box 23. I had never escaped. I had just forgotten. And now, it wanted me to take my place again. No. I clenched my fists, forcing down the fear. "I'm not staying." I reached into my pocket, pulling out something Earl had given me before we left, a second envelope. One that had been waiting in the dead letter room for years. I shoved it into the rusted post. The thing screamed. The fog shuddered. And suddenly, the world ripped apart. The escape. I woke up in my truck. The sun was rising. The road behind me was empty. No fog. No rusted post. No Box 23. Earl sat beside me, staring straight ahead. "It's done," he said. I exhaled shakily. My body still felt cold, like I had left part of myself behind in that place. Maybe I had. Earl turned to me. "Do you remember now?" I nodded. "Yeah." Box 23 wasn't just a place. It was a trap. A door that, once opened, never really closed. But this time I had shut it. I didn't ask what had been in the second letter. Some things were better left unread. As we drove back to town, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For the first time in days, there was nothing there. Nothing watching me. Nothing following me. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never deliver to Box 23 again. The price of breaking the rules. I shut the door. I returned the letter. But deep down I knew Box 23 isn't just a place. It's a wound. A scar on reality. I thought I had escaped. But something still feels wrong. The roads don't look the same. The air feels too still. And Earl hasn't spoken since we left. I have one last delivery to make. But this time, I don't think I'm coming back. The silent ride. The sun was rising as we drove back to town, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. But it didn't feel warm. It felt hollow. Earl sat stiffly in the driver's seat, eyes locked on the road. He hadn't said a word since we left box 23. Something about him was off. His hands gripped the wheel too tightly. His knuckles bone white. "Earl," I said, voice hoarse. "Are we good?" He didn't respond. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt too dry. My skin itched, like something was settling beneath it. The town finally came into view, the familiar buildings unchanged, untouched by the nightmare I had just escaped. But as we pulled into the post office parking lot, my stomach dropped. The sign was wrong. It still said Red Hollow Post Office, but the letters were backward, like I was looking at a reflection. I turned to Earl, dread coiling in my gut. "Earl, where the hell are we?" He finally turned to look at me, and his face wasn't his face anymore. The thing that wore Earl's skin. His eyes were wrong. Too dark, like holes in reality. His skin shifted, warping like a reflection in rippling water. "You never left," he said, voice layered, like 100 whispers speaking at once. I lunged for the door handle. Locked. My pulse pounded as the thing that looked like Earl reached for me. "You belong here," it whispered. "You always have." A sound rose in my throat, something between a scream and a sob. And then I remembered the rules. Rule number 5. If something tries to talk to you, don't listen. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't listen. Don't listen. The thing kept speaking, its voice slithering into my skull. "You open the door. You let us in. You have to finish the delivery." I forced my breathing to slow. My heartbeat steadied. And then, I threw open the glove compartment. The dead letter envelope was still there. The final letter. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single slip of paper, the ink fading and warped like it had been written long ago. It wasn't an address. It wasn't even a letter. It was a name. My name. And below it, written in jagged letters, "You were never meant to leave." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the letter, turned, and slammed it against Earl's chest. The second the paper touched his skin, he let out a horrible, guttural shriek, a sound that wasn't human, that wasn't meant for this world. His body twisted, shaking violently, his form flickering between Earl, my father, and something else entirely. The truck shook as the world around me warped, the buildings bending, stretching, like reality itself was unraveling. Then, everything went black, waking up in the real world. I woke up to rain on my face. I was lying in the middle of the road, gravel biting into my skin. I pushed myself up, gasping, looking around. The town was normal again. The post office stood where it should. The sign was correct. And the truck? Gone. Earl was nowhere to be seen. I staggered to my feet, chest heaving. The envelope was still in my hand. Only now, the name was gone. The ink had vanished, like it had never been there at all. The last rule. I never saw Earl again. I asked around. No one remembered him. No one even remembered hiring me. But my name was still in the system, and my paychecks kept coming. I kept my job. I kept delivering mail. But I never took Route 6 again. And I never, ever went near Box 23. But last night, I found something on my doorstep. A single envelope. No return address. No postage stamp. I picked it up with shaking hands. Turned it over. And in the same faded ink from before, 2 words. Come home. The end.